The Gray Rhino. The book is authored by Michele Wucker, a female writer who introduced a new concept called the Gray Rhino. Part 1. Gray Rhino Theory and its 5 stages. What is a gray rhino? We're all familiar with the Black Swan concept, which refers to highly improbable, high-risk events that are impossible to predict, such as terrorist attacks, the Southeast Asian tsunami, the 9/11 attacks, or the sinking of the Titanic. These events strike suddenly, are unpredictable, and cause massive damage when they occur. In contrast, a gray rhino represents highly probable, high-impact threats. The author illustrates this with an analogy. Imagine you're on a savanna, and there's an angry gray rhino charging toward you from a short distance. In this situation, you must react immediately, either run or shoot it. Rather than worrying about potential black swans in the distance, it's more crucial to address the obvious threat right in front of you. The author advocates for paying more attention to risks that show clear warning signs and are obvious, such as 1. Ignoring an approaching hurricane despite clear weather warnings. 2. Bankers repeating the same mistakes after experiencing the subprime mortgage crisis. 3. Local officials neglecting bridge maintenance despite known structural issues. 4. Corporate or national leaders holding on to power despite the clear need for succession. They would rather lead their country or company to destruction than relinquish their grip on power. There are countless examples of this. The author believes that most of the time, we don't fail to see danger. Rather, we see it clearly but remain indifferent. It's like seeing a rhinoceros charging at us, yet we typically stand frozen, waiting to be knocked over. This is what the author calls a gray rhino crisis. The author divides people's responses to gray rhino crises into 5 stages. Let's examine what each represents. The first stage is denial, where people find various reasons to reject warning signals. When hearing bad news, the initial reaction is disbelief and rejection. Why do we habitually deny the existence of crises? There are 2 main reasons. First, we tend to be overly optimistic about the future. Statistics show that most people overestimate their chances of success in their professional fields, believing their future selves will be boundlessly successful and achieve everything they imagine. This excessive optimism is particularly common among young people. Many parents also tend to be overly optimistic about their children's talents, generally overestimating their abilities and believing their child must be a once-in-a-century genius, thus imposing unrealistic high standards from an early age. People are also overly optimistic about their life expectancy, often overestimating it by 20 years. Generally, when people face disappointments in reality, they habitually place their hopes in the future, maintaining a blindly optimistic attitude. This bias leads people to deny crises as their first reaction. Secondly, denial is a primitive self-protection mechanism that helps us avoid immediate breakdown when facing crises, buying time to accept reality. Often, denial helps us focus on solving current problems until we have enough time to adapt to unpleasant situations and adjust our actions to correct issues. This is the first stage people go through when facing crises, the denial stage. The second stage is muddling through. As danger becomes more pressing, people tend to act like ostriches, burying their heads in the sand, pretending not to see or care, hoping the crisis will resolve itself. People repeatedly avoid the pain of solving problems, finding various excuses to delay, lack of budget, low political feasibility, or claiming it doesn't matter either way. Such excuses are common in businesses, governments, institutions, personal life, and financial sectors. The author cites several reasons for this muddling through tendency. First, government inefficiency and serious systemic defects, along with severe lack of human and financial resources. Crisis management tends to focus on urgent emergencies while neglecting important but non-urgent crises. Second, cognitive limitations, such as inadequate assessment of crisis damage, misinterpretation of crises, and lack of motivation to act on effective information. Third, we often hesitate between small immediate losses and larger future losses. Like when asked whether they would kill one person to save many lives, most people struggle with the question, choosing not to answer or refusing altogether. People often fail to maintain rational judgment when weighing pros and cons. Finally, we muddle through because of a peculiar cultural mindset that hopes crises will resolve themselves at the last moment. Like in many Hollywood movies, where the protagonist always finds a way to turn things around at the final moment. For instance, in Star Wars, the Jedi always manages to save Earth single-handedly in a short time. In Batman, the hero is always saved at the crucial moment by allies like Catwoman. After watching too many movies like this, people tend to believe that crises will naturally resolve themselves at the last moment. It's like the old saying, every cloud has a silver lining. However, movies are movies, never reality. In fact, Hollywood's home state of California faces numerous real crises, including water scarcity, housing shortages, fiscal budget chaos, and growing wealth inequality. These problems are very real, and unlike in movies, there's no magical plot twist. Things are actually getting worse. This pattern leads us to avoid problems and wait passively for them to resolve themselves. After this phase comes the third stage, delayed diagnosis. During this stage, decision-makers recognize the approaching danger but can't prioritize which crises to address first. They waste valuable time analyzing right from wrong, second-guessing themselves, and hesitating to take action. It's like someone standing still to analyze, should I jump left or right, while a charging rhinoceros approaches, only to end up getting knocked over. We usually think careful deliberation and considering all factors is good decision-making. But the author argues that excessive consideration creates huge opportunity costs. Healthcare is a perfect example. Preventive care that could be handled inexpensively is often delayed, resulting in $260 billion in lost productivity annually. The American Health Trust estimates that investing $10 per person would generate over $18 billion in healthcare savings over 10 to 20 years, not including gains in worker productivity and quality of life. The 2008 U.S. financial crisis illustrates this problem of overanalysis during crises. Federal Reserve meeting records show they were studying how to respond to a possible recession in January 2008. However, they focused on finding historical evidence of inflation during past crises while ignoring signals like unemployment rates and investment bank failures. Even in September, they unanimously opposed interest rate cuts. Only in October, after Lehman Brothers' collapse caused massive chaos, did the Fed abandon its gradualist approach. The author explains that the Fed's slow response in 2008 was largely because previous leadership feared criticism about creating financial bubbles. Their worry about repeating past mistakes made it difficult to accept new information. When people finally acknowledge danger, many factors hinder timely action, especially when there's no perfect solution and all alternatives require significant costs and sacrifices. Take global climate change and its resulting disasters, recognized as a major crisis requiring international cooperation since the early 21st century. But because there are no cost-free solutions, and both developed and developing nations must make major adjustments and bear costs, action has been inefficient. After this third phase comes the fourth stage, panic. When the crisis is imminent, when that rhinoceros is right in front of your nose, people typically respond with panic. Under intense pressure, our brains operate at high speed, memory improves, senses become sharper, and adrenaline increases. However, during these moments, we might overlook crucial information. In such situations, we could make either the best or worst decisions. Some people excel at controlling their emotions, remaining calm while others panic, enabling them to develop better action plans without falling into irrational responses. Others, however, succumb to panic and make terrifying decisions in dangerous situations. For instance, they might completely give up on self-preservation or engage in antisocial behavior, putting themselves in even more unpredictable danger. Take people's reaction to the Ebola virus as a classic example. A doctor who treated Ebola patients in Liberia found people's reactions in New York to be extremely exaggerated. Media coverage certainly didn't help, depicting patients' deaths in horrifically graphic detail, leaving everyone living under the virus's shadow. In reality, the virus doesn't spread through casual contact or through the air, basic facts that people either didn't know or deliberately ignored. Overall, panic amplifies minor initial problems and escalates them into disasters. This emotion can push us back to a stage of denial and resistance, ultimately preventing us from solving the actual problems at hand. After the fourth stage comes the final phase. In the fifth stage, people typically either rush to respond or completely break down. While actions taken at this point may have some effect, they're often too late, usually serving as remedial measures after damage has already occurred. Frequently finding oneself in such situations leads to enormous waste of resources. In summary, people's responses to Gray Rhino events follow 5 stages: denial, muddling through, arguing, panic, and rushed response. The author argues that if our ability to recognize and prevent disasters remains this poor, we'll be helpless when disaster strikes. Even if we can't change ourselves, we should at least understand what we're doing and why. Only by recognizing our blind spots, regularly examining our established thought patterns, building unmistakable warning systems, and establishing response mechanisms can we spot the charging Gray Rhino in time. Finally, the author presents a Gray Rhino hunting strategy, methods for dealing with Gray Rhino events. First, acknowledge the crisis's existence, prepare preventive measures early, and quickly identify factors affecting our perception. Especially during decision-making, ensure openness and welcome participation from people with different viewpoints and opinions. Second, accurately define the nature of Gray Rhino events. Determine the urgency of each situation through proper definition and solve problems systematically. Third, don't remain static. If possible, develop plans and execute them firmly. If unable to make necessary major changes, start with small, feasible actions. For example, fastening your seatbelt before driving. Buy yourself insurance. Fourth, don't waste a crisis. Crises and disasters inevitably bring unimaginable opportunities. Our cognitive biases drive us to take action on profitable ventures rather than merely acting to avoid problems. We must recognize the unique nature of crises and approach them as opportunities. This way, we can not only avoid disaster but also benefit from it. Fifth, position yourself where the wind is favorable and keep your eyes on the horizon. The earlier you spot a crisis, the better. This allows us to observe the approaching crisis and helps us make the right choices and take appropriate action. In simple terms, Gray Rhino events are both high-probability and high-impact events. The earlier we address them, the smaller our losses will be. The best way to avoid the impact of Gray Rhino crises is to move past the panic phase, transform denial and resistance into acceptance of the crisis, and convert procrastination into active planning. Skip the panic stage and move quickly into action. Author Michele Wucker is the director of the New York Institute for International Policy Studies and deputy director of the Chicago Council's Center for Global Affairs, as well as a media commentator. She's accustomed to creating top-level designs, which isn't difficult as it follows a problem-solving approach. It's like steering a ship at sea. If the ship veers right, you adjust left. If it veers left, you adjust right. There's always a vast gulf between thoughts and actions. Most situations aren't as simple as we imagine them to be. Major problems are major precisely because their complexity is almost unpredictable. One problem inevitably leads to new ones, and they can't be solved with just a few words. Nevertheless, raising risk awareness is always beneficial. Spotting risks, acting early, preparing in advance, and preventing problems before they occur can help us avoid many unnecessary losses.